and he actually was responsible for publicising the name Yowie. Before then, it was known as the Yahoo, or the Australian hairy man, or the Australian gorilla.
Welcome back to the Gary Jupiter podcast. I'm your host, Tom Franklin, and today we have on the wonderful Mr. Gary Opit, all the way from the beautiful country of Australia, to talk to us about Yowies. What are they? What encounters has he has, and what information does he know about it? We had a little bit of, miscommunication. Wasn't supposed to be today for me, but it's like he's a day ahead of me or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But either way, he was here waiting for me for a half hour. He graciously accepted to come on my show. If you have a story, you have experience, you have some research that you're doing, please contact me at the Eye of Jupiter podcast at gmail.com. Please do me a favor, like and subscribe to the channel over on YouTube. Leave a star or a thumbs up or write a comment. Follow me on Rumble. You can also download me on all your MP3 players, including Rumble. I'm also over there as well, and I'm all over social medias. All those are found in the bottom, along with some merch and whatever else you'd like to do to help me with this show. So, with all that out of the way, I don't want to keep him any longer. He's been waiting long enough. All the way from the great country of Australia, Mr. Gary Opit.
Hello.
Hi, sir. Like I said, once again, I'm sorry for the miscommunication, but what date is it for you there? What date is it?
Look, no, we are a day early, and when I got your email, it said it's going. Are you ready for the interview tomorrow? And I got that yesterday evening, sort of thing. So I thought, it's on tomorrow. And then when I went backstage, I thought I better check my diary. And then I thought, no, I'm a day early. I'm a day early. And so I was about to.
I was watching my buddy. Yeah.
Mistake, I'm a day early.
It happens, my friend. It's no big deal. I was ever watching my buddy Austin. Was Austin? He runs the Dead Chronicles. I was watching his episode because I've been meaning to catch up on it and watch it all the way through. And I look at my email and I'm like, oh my God, Gary's over there waiting on me. And I just powered up my computer real quick. And you see me, I have my daughter plugging in lights and everything. But now we're here, and I'm so happy to meet you. Please do me a favor. Could you introduce yourself to me as well as my audience and tell us a little bit about yourself and where we can find you?
Yeah. So, yes, of course, my name's Gary Opit, and I'm coming to you from my office and study in New South Wales. This is northeast New South Wales, near Byron Bay, and so this is the extreme eastern tip of Australia. And for those unfamiliar with Australia, look, that's, if you can see, that's a map.
Yes.
Of Australia, and I'm on the most easterly tip. And this particular map shows all the territories of the original Australians, of course, the Australian First Nation Indigenous people. And, of course, it's traditional in Australia always to start any program, interview or program by paying respect to the, in this locality, it's Bundjalung land. And so we always start a program paying respect to Bundjalung elders, past, present and emerging. And we live, and this is just from a book, a long time, a very old book, called as you can see, the Australian Aborigines, and and we live close to the most important Bundjalung ceremonial site where Bundjalung law traditionally was created. So our property here, it's a 6-acre property. It's sitting within 1,000 hectares of undisturbed Australian bushland.
Beautiful.
And with 6 kilometres of, which is about, 3 or 4 miles of undisturbed wilderness beach. So I'm coming from the Coral Sea. And so we're just surrounded by forest. And we actually have Yowies living around us, 2 different species, a tiny species and a huge species. And we also have other cryptozoological animals that never been classified, including the marsupial dog or thylacine or Tasmanian tiger or marsupial tiger, marsupial wolf.
You still think they exist there in your area? I mean, yes. Wow.
Or indeed, yes. In fact, I've seen 3 of them near the house.
Kidding.
And these ones were all black and about the size of a leopard. And one of them I got to look at for about 5 minutes from about 10 meters away in my headlights. But it's very rare to observe any of these animals because they have large foraging territories. So it's only once a decade you might actually see one if you're very lucky. But I've collected many reports. So I'm an environmental consultant. So I've spent I'm 77 years old now. So I've spent my life in southeastern Queensland, northeastern New South Wales. I was working as a national park ranger and working in wildlife parks. So for some years I was a koala handler, breeding koalas, and every day my work was holding koalas and placing koalas on people and taking photographs of them holding a koala. It's an Australian tradition, especially like for young people, and telling them all about koalas and wildlife. And I've been since 1965 involved in conservation. I was a founding member of the Wildlife Preservation Society of Queensland, Gold Coast branch where I lived. Gold Coast and Surfers Paradise is a large city, small compared to European and American cities, and then for the last sort of few decades, I've been undertaking fauna and flora surveys and ecological assessments for local government departments and state government departments, national parks and wildlife service, and for private individuals. And for the last 28 years, I've had my own wildlife identification radio program on the Australian Broadcasting Corporations, which is a government-funded, we call it the ABC, Australian Broadcasting Corporations radio station, 94.5 FM, which is North Coast New South Wales radio station. It only goes for about 10 minutes. I used to get about half an hour, but now it's on just once a week on a Saturday morning. And I have to instantly identify every species of mammal, bird, reptile, amphibian, or invertebrate, because that's what my work is. Every day I'd be out in the forests by myself in remote localities, identifying the animals and the plants.
Mm-hmm.
And
the flora and the fauna. Mm-hmm.
And I spent 2 years living in New Guinea. This is 73, 74. I was living with headhunters that had never seen a white man before. And I was the first white man to enter an area. Often the people would run screaming because they thought I was some sort of a monster or a ghost or something. And then they would realise I was one of those of white men that they'd heard of. And they might be a warrior of the tribe, and they'd blacken me with pig grease and charcoal, and I'd be taking part in all kinds of rituals and minor warfare. We had bows and arrows and spears.
Fascinating.
Which I've still got all of that stuff. And then I did the first fauna surveys for the national parks in New Guinea, the first ecological assessment for the. I was the first person to lecture on ecology at the New Guinea University. It's really remote. New Guinea, of course, is a large island, the largest tropical island on Earth, north of Australia, part of Australia until the seas rose 8,000 years ago or so, and disconnected New Guinea and Tasmania from Australia. And then I spent 1.5 years all through Southeast Asia in the middle 70s before tourism sprung up, and I did the first fauna survey for the Malaysia national parks, and I've seen most of the wildlife there, and in Australia. I've spent a lot of time all over Australia, living for 1.5 years at a time, camping out through really remote areas of Australia with the family before the kids started school.
That's wonderful.
And I spent 6 Helens erupt in 1980. So, yeah, that's a quick overview of my year in life.
Speaking of the thylacine, you would think, I was watching, I am actually quite interested in the Tasmanian tiger or the thylacine. It's just one of those animals that I just enjoy. You know, the old, there's a video, like the last, authenticated video is from the 1930s.
Yeah.
Yes. And it was in a park somewhere, and there's been sightings. And I think the true gnosis of where you can probably find these animals would probably be Papua New Guinea because of its remoteness, because of its lack of human population. And what would you say to that?
Oh, yes, definitely. So I've spent a lot of time because, in my line of work, I'm always asking people what wildlife they've seen, and particularly asking if they've seen rare animals. So we have this wonderful group of carnivorous marsupials that include the Tasmanian tiger or thylacine, also the Tasmanian devil, and then you have 4 or 5 species of quolls, which look a bit like spotted civets, slightly resembling cats, about cat size.
Oh, okay.
And then there's very large numbers of very small carnivorous marsupials called antechinus, and they're similar to the size of small rats, and some of brush-tailed phascogales. So we have a unique fauna here, and then of course you have all the herbivorous marsupials, well known, like the koala, kangaroo, wombats, and possums, a whole array of possums and gliding possums. And the interesting thing about the Australian fauna, it's related to the South American fauna. Yeah, yes. Gliding possums are the largest one, greater glider, a meter long.
Yeah, I'm actually located on the Yucatan Peninsula of Central America in Mexico. Okay.
So that's me many years ago, and there's a gliding possum, yellow-bellied gliding possum on my shoulder in that picture there. So that's what a gliding possum looks like.
Okay.
Beautiful animals.
Yes. There's like I was telling you, I'm here in Central America on the Yucatan, and we have the Calakmul Nature Reserve. I actually have property where I found jaguar prints. We have coatis here, and a lot of I've seen coatis. I've heard howler monkeys, and I've seen spider monkeys. And me coming from the States and then living in Europe for a number of years and being here for the last 3 years, people just don't know how incredible it is to see animals that are outside of their sphere of understanding. And we all know that Australia is such an odd, because of its separation. And, if you use the theory of evolution and its separation being an island away, even when the water was down during the last ice age, down during the last ice age, there was still a separation where they probably couldn't cross. So there's that just like the Galapagos Islands, there's this isolation where things get larger, they get more spiky, they get more venomous. And it's just, I love that. So, What can you tell me about the Yowie? What is it? What do you know about it? Have you cited it? What is it? What is it about this creature? Because it only recently came into my purview that they even existed. What can you tell me about that, sir?
So the Yowie first was encountered in the early days of British settlement. So that happened in 1788 when a fleet of 11 ships left the United Kingdom and sailed to Australia and set up in Sydney Harbour, and they named Sydney after one of the officials back in England. I forget who he was, and they set up. They brought about 700 convicts, criminals, people that had committed very minor offences. That didn't involve the death penalty, obviously, so they weren't murderers or whatever. They were usually people that, very minor thieves or what have you. And they set up the first colony in Sydney Harbour at Circular Quay, and then of course the Gamilaroi people and other tribal people had been living there for about 80,000 years. And so the First Nation Australian people are incredibly ancient.
Yes.
They have the longest living undisturbed culture. And of course, they're still here today. Though they were devastated by smallpox and other diseases, exactly the same thing that occurred in North and South America when Europeans arrived and accidentally introduced the pig disease, which is smallpox.
Because they didn't keep livestock, so they had no immunity where we were getting these livestock diseases. So when they came over, they didn't do that. So for them, it was devastating. Yes, absolutely.
Yes, that's right. And then of course the settlers, of course, were murdering the locals. Just the same thing has happened in North and South America, of course, exactly the same situation, colonization. But however, eventually, relatively recently, only in the last few decades, of course, it's been we've been a federation, the Commonwealth of Australia, since 1901. And but the Aboriginal people were only made citizens of the country in their own country in about 1967.
Wow, that's
crazy. Because the Europeans, of course, is typical with European colonisation. They had a white Australia policy where if you weren't from England, basically, or Europe, you weren't welcome in the country, even if it's your homeland where you'd lived for something like 80,000 years. But anyway, things have changed with the education and understanding, and now we're extremely fond and love our traditional people, and that's the way it should be all over the world, because we're a single species, and within 1 or 2 millimeters beneath our skin, you can't tell one person from another. We're all exactly the same.
Absolutely. Yeah. My girlfriend herself is Mayan, 100% pure blood Mayan, like Mayan. Yeah. So yeah.
And I've seen the Mayan crystal, Michael Hedges' crystal skull that was brought to Australia, and quite a remarkable.
It's an incredible place. It's an incredible place, my friend. If you ever find a chance to come on over here, you can come on over, and I'll hook you up with a good hotel, and you can go out and look at some of the pyramid sites around here. The famous Kalakmul, and it's beautiful.
I'd really love to do that. Yeah. So back to the Yowie. So the first illustration of it, and I have it here, because so what happened? The Yowie wasn't known as the Yowie until the 1970s, until the first cryptozoologists in Australia, Rex and Heather Gilroy, private natural history museums. Rex was particularly interested in entomology and butterfly collections, etc. And he set up these little museums, and people paid a minor admission to them. And he began to receive large numbers of reports from mainly rural people who had encountered animals that they were unable to identify, and of course he became extremely interested in this. And then I met him at his museum, and I talked about the encounters that I had, and this is several decades ago. Rex, unfortunately, has passed away, but his wife Heather's still living in the original Blue Mountains home west of Sydney. And so it was Rex Gilroy who really publicised the fact that we have an enormous unknown animal in Australia, and he actually was responsible for publicising the name Yowie. Before then, it was known as the Yahoo, or the Australian hairy man, or the Australian gorilla. Wow. And so it's a very gorilla-like animal, but it's also very much like the Sasquatch or a Bigfoot, and it's probably the same species, and probably the same species as the Yeti and the Yeren, and all of these other unclassified bipedal primates, probably hominins, or maybe hominids. It's hard to know if they're actually another species of human, but they seem to most resemble that species, Gigantopithecus blacki, only known from a few teeth and a jaw or so from China. So we've got no physical evidence of it. But so I'll show you the very first printed illustration of it, which is 1912, and this is from my book Australian Cryptozoology that I just self-published and sold at conferences, at cryptozoological conferences.
Oh, please do me a favor. Have you sent me your links, sir? Have you sent me all your links to your books and your things like that? Have you sent me those yet?
It's available as an ebook on Amazon.
Okay.
And I haven't really publicised it much because I've been working on a much more detailed a new book called Shocking Encounters in the Australian Bush.
Okay.
Because I published that, self-published it, 20 years ago, and then I've had so many more reports since, particularly from my radio show. That's where most of my reports have come from. But anyway, so that's the book that's available on Amazon.
That resembles yes.
And that's a life drawn from life from a Yowie researcher by the name of Pixie Burns, and that's the book. It's the picture of me holding one of the few plaster casts we have of the animal. It was taken a few years ago, and this is the first illustration published in a newspaper in the Sydney Sun newspaper in 1912, and so you can see that's what it looks like, and down to its feet. So that's a really amazing illustration of it. And this animal, so it was seen by a surveyor, and it's it was seen by a surveyor who was surveying land in very remote areas, and this the hairy man or Australian gorilla or Yahoo, and it was called the Yahoo because it often vocalised, calling out Yahoo, Yahoo, and so that's
sounds like an overzealous American in the Australian bush.
and of course anyone that saw it, it's a very shy animal, and it's mainly nocturnal, but it's occasionally encountered in the daytime. It seemed to have a very large territory, and the first encounter, published encounter, was in a book published in 1827, and it was called the Putakan. The local people, the indigenous people, called it the Putakan, and they said it was a big human-like hairy animal that only came out at night and occasionally bellowed, and that only lived in the most steepest and inaccessible escarpments, because in Australia we have is enormous mountain range. It's not very high, but it's extremely rugged, and it's called the Great Dividing Range.
Okay.
And it's all sandstone. It's about 300 million years old or something. I think it's Triassic from memory, and it runs. It's only something like 100 kilometres inland from Sydney, and runs right along the coast. Goes all the way up, almost up to Cape York Peninsula. It goes inland and then moves back towards the coast in places, etc. And it's all plateaus, so it's not like a mountain range, say in North America or other places, South America, with snow-capped mountains, peak mountain tops or anything. It's an elevated ocean floor that's been raised up, and so it's plateaus of sandstone, similar to those plateaus that you have in South America, where the Lost World book by Arthur Conan Doyle was based, where you have these plateaus with flat tops and then sheer escarpments and gullies, and so yeah, it's very rugged, and it's
Okay.
very infertile, and it's covered in eucalyptus forest, unique Australian forest, and so it's almost completely inaccessible. More accessible these days, and of course that's where this animal was most likely seen. And as you get down south, it gets colder, of course, and we get the snowy mountains, and so that's where a lot of encounters were made, and on the south coast of New South Wales, south of Sydney, because that's where most number of British and European settlers were setting up, and they were logging and mining, and then they'd encounter this enormous animal. And that particular one that I just showed the illustration, the men were sitting around a campfire with their dogs, group of surveyors camping out in the forest, and this animal came bellowing towards them and stood in the campfire for several minutes, bellowing at them and looking at them, and then turned, and then it ran off on its four legs. So it's the interesting thing. It moves very fast, and it can travel on its hind legs, or it's bipedal. It's bipedal, but it's also quadrupedal. So
Right.
so it can travel very fast, but it's harmless, which is why it's unknown. It's like the Bigfoot or Sasquatch or all of these animals. I know some people have gone missing, and they may have been killed by a big rogue male or a territorial male or something or other. But basically, the animals are harmless. And the early reports in the Australian newspapers, particularly regional newspapers, all through the 19th century, many of the reports said that it was completely harmless. That people would encounter it, and then it would immediately turn and run for its life, or their dogs would chase it off.
That's interesting.
And of course, if an animal's dangerous, we know all about it.
Yeah, especially in that time period. I can only speak from North America. We're like, the wolves and stuff, and they just they're dangerous, and which they were from what I knew, and they kind of just took their whole thing. I mean, they only existed naturally when I was born, like in Canada. They reintroduced them in certain areas and things like that. It's interesting that they can also be quadrupedal. I can think that's the right word. Yeah, because there's cases of the Bigfoot here. They call it a spider crawl, where they can get down on all fours and to move, and they're just as fast and as agile. And they also they say it moves in such a fluid motion that it also seems unreal that they can cross a space of 10 meters or so in like 3 steps. It's quite interesting that I don't know if it's true or not. You would know better than I would. I've heard that the Yowie was more aggressive, and what you're telling me is the opposite.
Yes, no, it's not aggressive. Otherwise, there's not a single report of anyone being killed, but there has been the odd rumor, someone was killed, but it was hushed up or something or other. But that's probably not real, because see what's happened. Us Europeans, and I'm like third generation Australian, so my ancestors were Scottish and Northern European, and they came out in sailing ships in the 1800s. They were very adventurous, they were farmers, and they were
Oh, they had to be. That's a long way.
tailors, right? Yeah, yeah. And on my father's side, they migrated from Northern Europe to Turkey, had a tailor shop in Turkey. They migrated then to New York, had a tailor shop in New York. They then migrated to London, had a tailor shop in England, somewhere in London. And they migrated to Sydney, and my grandparents were born in Sydney, and married in 1913, and then my parents were born here. So, but of course, so I'm third generation Australian, and you can only non-Indigenous people only go back, say, maybe 6 generations or 7 at the most, or something now. But of course, the true Australians have been here for something like 80,000 years. And of course, so all the different language groups in Australia, so they're very similar to everywhere else in the world with Indigenous people, and they know what the animal very well that we call the Yowie, and they have their own names for them. In this area, it's Cherrawarra, and further south it's Doolagal. Pudikin is another name. There's names from all across Australia, and it lives right across Australia. And we've got interesting reports that have come from, like, in northwestern the Kimberley region of Australia, and of course, and a little bit about the Australian continent. On the east coast, it's wet, so we have wet forests. We have the world's tallest flowering plants, these giant eucalyptus or gum trees, eucalyptus trees, that reach a height of the same height as the Californian redwoods, 300 or 400 feet. Yeah. Most of the biggest ones were logged a long time ago, of course, as is normal. And then as you go further west, it's drier. But we don't have any deserts like in the Sahara or something. The deserts are, and then they're quite unlike the American deserts. We don't have any native cacti or anything. We have the deserts are thickly vegetated with ground covers of spinifex grass and eucalypts and wattles or acacias and a whole array of other unique Australian plants. And the Yowie lives right across them. And so there's one interesting report from northwestern Australia. I think they were prospectors, and they shot an Australian gorilla and had a look at it, and there they had this enormous thing that looked very much like a Bigfoot. But the other interesting thing is that there's after that illustration that I showed you that was published in 1912 in the Sydney Sun newspaper, and you notice this animal described, it's got very large canines, which is unusual for a Bigfoot or Sasquatch. I don't think they normally have canines. Mostly the animals that have been seen don't have those large teeth, but that might have been some sort of an abnormality, you don't know. But there was one letter received where the gentleman that wrote the letter to the newspaper stated that that animal, which they just simply called the Bombala anthropoid, because they didn't quite know what it was, or gorilla, native gorilla. They have it in the Hawkesbury River area, and about 20 people have heard it calling, and several people have had encounters with it, and three of the people said that it had a pouch with a baby in its pouch, just
it's like a marsupial. Wow.
Yeah, and he believed that it was a marsupial man. Now that's the only report we ever received. So we don't really know what's going on because we have no positive evidence that the animal exists, and we still don't really have DNA. And of course, most Australians don't may have heard of the Yowie, but they're not really interested in wildlife or the bushland, because, like the rest of the world, most of the Australians now are suburbaners. They live in their suburbs. just like everywhere else. And there's a lot less people in the countryside.
Especially Australia.
Yes, and Australia's quite a fertile country, though not as fertile as North America and Europe and Eurasia and stuff, because we never had any ice ages here because we're too far from the poles, because the northern sort of 1/4 of Australia, say, is actually in the tropics, and so southern Australia is still temperate, like and so we never had ice ages. So we never had ice sheets, and so unlike the northern half of the planet, where the ice sheets ground all the rock into really fine soil, and also carved big hollows everywhere, and then evaporated, and so you got great soil and lakes, freshwater lakes everywhere, and so you got the perfect environment for a civilization, because you've got good agriculture, because you've got plenty of water and fertile soils. Australia's has never had that, so it's very ancient soils. The continent's very sort of ancient, pristine condition.
Oh, it's like a time capsule of sorts.
It is indeed, and the animals and plants are incredibly ancient. And as I said before, the animals are related to the South American animals as well as the plants, and also from Africa. And so they're all ancient Gondwana plants. And the Australian continent's moving north at about 6 centimetres a year. And as the ice ages came on, Australia was drifting north, so the climate's never changed in Australia. So we have the most ancient, some of the most ancient animals on Earth. We have the lungfish, completely unchanged in about 350 million years, still living in 2 freshwater rivers in a relatively dry continent. We have the platypus and the echidna, the last of the monotremes, which are egg-laying mammals, absolutely amazing animals, that dominated the world for 70 million years before the age of the dinosaurs. And we've got fossils of those. They lived with the dinosaurs. The platypus and echidna, lived with the dinosaurs for 60 million years before the dinosaurs went extinct. So we've got fossils of them for 120 million years. And then, of course, the marsupials. And the interesting thing about the marsupials, they're often thought to be more primitive, but they're actually more advanced than we are.
Okay.
And the marsupials, the placentals, eutherians, are a more primitive family of mammals, warm-blooded animals, which were being hunted into extinction by the dinosaurs, and particularly in North America, because paleontologists had discovered that there was huge numbers of marsupials and small numbers of placentals. And the reason for that was that marsupials, like us placentals or eutherians, we developed the ability of keeping the eggs inside the womb and then giving birth to a live young. But the only problem was that you were then lumbered with a large young one, both in the womb and following you, clinging to you or whatever. And so it made it easier for you to be predated upon by, all the dinosaurs. And of course, the place was full of small dinosaurs.
Is there also a longer development process for that type of?
Exactly, yeah. And so the marsupials evolved a more advanced method where they would keep the embryo in the womb until it was the best possible time to give birth, when there was the most amount of food and nutrition available, and then they give birth to very tiny young. So if anything happened, you didn't lose very much energy, and then you kept the young in a pouch so you could take the young one with you. And then kangaroos in particular, most advanced animals on the earth, because they don't use any energy when they're moving, because they're hopping or bouncing. And bouncing, when you bounce, you're not using any energy because you're absorbing energy every time you hit. So you can travel long distances very rapidly by jumping, much more efficient movement than running. And of course, the reason we're successful as human beings is because we're bipeds, because being bipedal is more efficient movement than quadrupeds. Because if you're four-legged, you use a lot more energy. You can run faster, so like a cheetah or a lion or any large predator, or horses and cattle and sheep and antelopes and everything else. But you use up energy quickly, whereas if you're on two legs, you use energy more efficiently, and that's why the dinosaurs are able to take over, because they evolved bipedal locomotion in the very early days, and two-legged is better than four-legged when you're moving about, and so that's why dinosaurs dominated the world for 130 something million years, and then now we've risen up onto our hind legs, so 2 or 3 million years ago, or whatever, or a million years ago, whatever it was, and so we've been able to dominate the world because we're bipedal, and of course then we developed our large brains, and so
and the ability to grasp things, and maybe
grasp,
even predict the future a little bit farther out, and things like
that.
That goes with the developed cerebral cortex, and yes,
I think what could happen. And remember, nature always bats last, and what we think in our minds is pure delusion. We make models of reality around us, but we could follow the line of dinosaurs. The same thing could happen, millions of years into the future, which is unimaginable. But so you could come back several million years later and find that humans have evolved into a whole array of animals that now somewhat resemble dinosaurs.
Well, I'm here for it.
T-Rex like humans, and
we're here for it whether we want to or not. You know what I mean? Like, who knows? Maybe those little toes will eventually become flippers when we're out there and we're the best swimmers again. It's just very interesting that the I'm sorry. It's one of those kind of shows where I just, because it's such, I enjoy. For lack of a better term, cryptozoology. Even the duck-billed platypus was a cryptoid until it was discovered. Well, not discovered, but rediscovered, however you want to call it, whatever terminology you want to use. And it's just like, I guess my question would be, Mr. Opit, like, have you had any personal encounters, or do you interview people, or native many, people?
Many. So my first encounter as a national park ranger in 1971. Up in Lamington National Park. It's the remains of a 20 million year old volcano. I think it's the largest volcanic caldera in the southern hemisphere, on otherwise flat coastal land, and it's all covered in subtropical rainforest, ancient Gondwana rainforest that came from near the South Pole originally, when Australia was much further south, and it's all a national park, because it was too rugged and wild to settle and clear for farming, because there was plenty of eucalyptus covered grasslands that were perfect for raising sheep and cattle and what have you, and growing crops. And so it was made a national park. And I was there in 1971, and as a ranger, and a very remote area, of course, but a road obviously up to it, and the guest house called the O'Reilly's guest house, and then something began banging on the walls of the cabin. That we had a little cabin, it was like a 3-bedroom timber house, and we just had a fuel stove. We had electric light, but there was no power point, so it was just a single electrical line running up to the ranger's quarters. And so we had a kerosene fridge, and in 1971, like, we just had axes. We didn't have a chainsaw, and our job mainly was to walk the tracks and maintain them, and taking an axe with us, and any trees that had fallen across the tracks, we then would spend the day cutting through the tracks with an axe. So I was a good axeman, and of course it's rainforest, so there's millions upon millions of trees. Some of them can be 2 or 3 meters in diameter, so like 12 foot in diameter, but most of them are only like 3 or 4 feet in diameter, say a meter or so, and a lot less, and so mainly smaller trees falling across the tracks, then then something. The next thing, something was heard underneath the cottage, because it was built on a slope, so it was on a ridge top, and surrounded by rainforest, except in the front where the road was, and so the front of the house was level with the road and the ground, and just back, about 20 feet from the road. But the ground dropped down, and so it was like 2 stories at the back of the house. But it was built on large pillars or stumps, timber stumps. So we had a section under the house where we kept our tools, and that was also where the laundry was, and the bathroom where you'd shower. And then we had a toilet, a little timber toilet with a drop pit behind the house, and of course we'd cut timber, and then to have hot water, we had a copper bowl in the backyard, and we'd light a fire under that, and it would burn for an hour and heat the water, so we could have a shower, and showers for 3 or 4 rangers. And then we had a big iron stove inside, big metal cast iron stove, and we'd have a fire in that, and we'd always have a fire burning inside the stove. And then that helps you get your hot water for a cup of tea or a coffee, and you cook your food on top of the iron stove. So we had a huge big pile of timber, a stack of timber for burning. Anyway, something threw, this is in pitch blackness, something threw all the tools out from under the house. And then it destroyed the wood pile, and it pulled timber stakes that were, say, 6 feet in length, that were sledgehammered, 2 or 3 feet into the ground, that held up the whole structure. It pulled them out, and there were several of those that pulled out, and then just threw all the timber all over the place. And that was in pitch dark. We didn't discover that even until the next morning. And we had to rebuild it and put the tools away, and we couldn't work out what had done it. Like, we were thinking some kind of ghost or poltergeist or whatever, but there was known that there was believed there was some unknown big animal, and it was generally known as a bunyip, the mountain bunyip. And the O'Reilly, I asked the O'Reilly, do you know of some big animal? Because this is like something with hands to do this. Unless it was some sort of paranormal event, and it was, poltergeists and things like that. They're not that destructive. So anyway, it was a complete mystery until although the O'Reilly said, the Bernard O'Reilly, the main chap running the guest house, which was only like 100 metres up the road from us, and that was the end of the road. The rest of it was all rainforest wilderness all around us. He'd been followed by an animal, and he'd backtracked trying to find it. He never ever saw it. They often had these horrendous screams coming at them from an escarpment where they often camped, because they grazed cattle, and they took the cattle, and then they'd take cream on an all-day journey down to civilization to sell the cream to get a bit of money. And then, they also brought people up and as a guest house to try to earn a bit of money in this remote location that they'd cleared and settled before it turned into a national park. But so it wasn't until about half a dozen years later before... in 1975, I was in a very remote location deep in the rainforest, as usual, always exploring the rainforest by myself, just on a day's walk, trackless rainforest on the eastern side of Springbrook, which is a plateau closer to the coast and to the Gold Coast than Lamington National Park or the Lamington Border Ranges, McPherson Ranges. And I had an animal roaring at me, roaring like a lion, and of course we don't have any lions, and that was strange. And then a couple of years later, the head ranger up in Springbrook, a gentleman named Percy Window, he had a face-to-face encounter with this animal for about 10 minutes, and
wow.
It was great. Yeah, he had his axe with him because that was your usual job, was to walk the tracks and cut down and cut away any trees that had fallen across the walking tracks, going to a lookout, best of all lookouts for the tourists. And he heard this grunting noise, and he snuck up to see, thinking a pig was loose in the park, a wild pig or someone's domestic pig. And he came face to face with this animal that was about something like 7 foot high or 8 feet high, uh, and looked exactly like a gorilla as far as he was concerned, with a black shiny face and big yellow eyes. And
Wow.
and they're only like 3 meters apart, like about 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 feet apart. And he said they stood staring at each other for 10 minutes, and then then it just turned and walked away, and because unaggressive. And there was quite a few encounters over the years on Springbrook, so then and there I spent most of my life in really remote areas, and I never encountered anything, and I was very skeptical to begin with, because I was thinking, well, I haven't seen anything, and the animal's definitely not a herbivore like a gorilla, because if they were a herbivore, it's easy to see, because they're forced to consume large amounts of vegetation.
Yeah, they're constantly foraging. Yes,
they've got to defecate, and so there was no sign of a herbivorous animal wandering around, but a carnivorous animal is altogether different. But then I discovered that there was, like, when I was living on Tamborine Mountain, the neighbour was telling me that there was some unknown predator feeding on the small kangaroos called paddy melons. And then one night I had an astounding series of howls, and not really howls, but roars, bellows, that went for about 5 minutes. It sounded like, aye, 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 these really bellowing, roaring sounds. And we don't have wolves. We have dingoes, which are distantly related to Asian wolves, and or Asian wild dogs. They were introduced around about 3,000 or 4,000 years ago by Macassan traders, trading with Aboriginal people, First Nation people in the northern coast of Australia. They're coming down from Indonesia, and they were after treepang or bestemir or sea slugs, and they were trading with the indigenous people for thousands of years, and they introduced the dingo, and which was like a semi-wild dog that the Macassans had, and then they spread right across Australia,
right.
and made partly responsible for the decline of the thylacine or Tasmanian tiger, which is a dog-like carnivore, but a marsupial, so unrelated. So I heard these bellows, and the dingoes were howling as well, because I could compare the calls to the dingoes, and there was nothing like any known animal that was bellowing, and then then a couple of decades ago, we moved to this locality as southeastern Queensland became highly developed. The population growth, like it's going on everywhere, cities are getting larger, and I prefer to live in the countryside, in a rural environment. So, but only we've got small towns of about 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 scattered, and on the coastline here, it's all national parks, because it was never farmed, because it's all sand dunes and wetlands, and so they were turned into national parks decades ago.
Okay.
So little villages situated along the coast with sort of wilderness in between, so I was walking with my dog just near our house here, and and something began moving through the vegetation, thick vegetation, towards us, and was cracking 2 large sticks together, and I got a glimpse of it, but all I could see was a hairy animal, maybe 1.5, maybe 6 or 7 feet tall or something. You couldn't quite tell, but it it came towards me and walked back and forth for about 20 minutes.
Okay.
And dog barked at it a couple of times, and I pushed my way in to try to have a look at it because I know the animal's harmless. It's not dangerous. It's not as if you're trying to approach a lion or a tiger or something. It's a relatively harmless animal. But most people, of course, majority of people that encounter these animals, usually city dwellers out for riding their bikes in the countryside or going for a bushwalk or whatever, or sometimes farmers or rural dwellers, of course, but they're in more forested habitat, so I couldn't see the animal. But interestingly, in the same locality, our daughter Loana with her partner Matteo, they were visiting us from Sydney, and they had an excellent view of a yowie. It actually charged at them several times.
Oh,
And
bluff charge.
Yeah, bluff charge. And so they stood their ground for about 10 or 15 minutes as this thing came crashing through the vegetation with its feet thump, 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 thump like that. And then, but it would never actually emerge. And they were in the nature reserve on a walking track to the beach, and then after 10 or 15 minutes, they decided it doesn't want us here. We'd better keep on going. And then it continued to sort of bluff charge them. And they didn't see any sign of it until they got back they were just off the track a short distance. They got back onto the track because they'd just been looking at a great big old tallowood tree. And it ran across the track behind them. So they got a view of it. But only for a few seconds, but because it ran at great speed, and it was an animal about 7 feet tall, bipedal, and just covered in black hair, and looked very sort of like an enormous person. But
that's
other people
very often what the encounters. I mean, like the encounters almost coincide with what you hear in North America and in other parts. Like you were saying, but I'm more versed, and there's different types here too. I want to get into that with you, the smaller ones, and maybe like Homo floresiensis and things like that. Like maybe there's a connection there too. There's they have ones called the wood booger. They're more squared off. The nose is not, it's more human-like, but the teeth are like large, like chiclets, like little pieces of gum. They have like a larger mouth. They're a little bit more aggressive. Then you have things like the skunk ape, which is a little smaller but smelly. And then you have like the big conical ones like you've seen on the Patty Gimlin film in Bluff Creek, California. So you were telling me that there's two species. There's the large ones you're saying are between 7-8 foot tall, which is very congruent with what I'm hearing over here. But I haven't heard about the smaller one. And, recently within the last, I'd say 15 years, there was the discovery of the hominid on one of the islands, either Indonesia or Malaysia, I'm not sure which one, of Homo floresiensis. And, you know what I mean? So that being out of the realm of existence, I think that was only 15,000 years ago, supposedly, when they actually went extinct. So that's just very interesting. What can you tell me about the smaller version of the yowie?
Yeah, so it's known, it's well known as well by the First Nation people, and it's also known as the little hairy man or the little hairy people, also known as Janjadi or Jungari, and in this area it's known as a Nimbinji. Or Nimbinj or Nimbin, and there's a town of Nimbin named after it.
Wow.
And because the animal Bunjalung tradition, folk stories, how an elder tried to smoke one of these little miniature hairy men out of a cave and set a fire in the entrance of the cave, but it climbed up out of the cave. But so the Nimbin area was known as an area where the animals live. And in 1973, a well-known Australian festival known as a counterculture alternative festival, the Aquarius Festival, was set up there, and Nimbin is now the alternative town in Australia.
Okay.
This town Nimbin, and it's named after. It's a place full of all kinds of artists, and all the buildings are covered in coloured, painted people, and the people are very environmentally and socially aware. And that's only about like 100 kilometres to the southwest of us, where we are at the moment. But so the it's an animal that stands about a metre tall or less.
So 3 feet?
Yeah, about 3 feet. And so it's known as the Hobbit, or Homo floresiensis, and it was discovered by Australian and Indonesian paleontologists who are excavating a cave on the island of Flores in the eastern archipelago of Indonesia, so that directly above Australia. But Australia has never been connected to Southeast Asia, so we have no Southeast Asian animals. As I said before, Australian animals are ancient Gondwana species, and they're most closely related to South American animals. South America is full of marsupials, as you know. Possum.
Oh, like the what's that? Kabari?
Yes.
What's it? Calabara? It's like a large rat. That's my girlfriend always mentions it. But yeah, I see what you're saying now. They have like this. There's a certain resemblance.
Yes, and so genetic examination has found that all of the Australian marsupials are related to a little tiny opossum that lives in the Antarctic beech forests in the very southern tip of South America. And of course, South America was joined directly to Antarctica.
The Patagonia region you're referring to.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So we don't have any Eurasian animals, though now we do, of course, because European settlers introduced dogs and cats and foxes and rabbits and of course cattle and all the domestic stock. We've got the only wild single-humped camels in the world running through our deserts. We've got wild donkeys, wild horses, wild cattle, wild pigs.
I didn't know about the camels. Camels. That's amazing.
Oh yeah, the deserts are full of camels. Yeah, they're some of the only wild camels left on the planet. Yeah, because all the others were domesticated. You've got some double-humped camels living in the Gobi Desert, but
Okay.
I don't think there's any domestic camels. It's just like cattle, there's almost no domestic wild cattle left. They're all domesticated, etc. And wild horses, the same thing. Then of course in North America you've got horses, wild feral horses.
Yes, we have them on I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. We have them on the eastern shore down on Assateague Island near Ocean City, Maryland, that's a protected area. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Australia is full of wild horses, wild cattle, wild camels, wild goats, along with the native animals.
It's also very destructive to the native animals, I imagine, too, isn't it?
They can be very, and also the great problem was that the Australian Indigenous people, referred to as Aboriginal people, they were like all traditional people. They lived totally in tune with the environment, and they were like fire stick farmers. They were actually farmers. They were hunter gatherers, but they were farmers as well. And they were probably the first people to grind seeds and make bread. They had a very advanced stone technology and a very, very sophisticated understanding of reality. The dreaming, which relates very much to quantum mechanics, quantum physics. So very advanced understanding of reality compared to the extremely superstitious understandings of reality for the say the Europeans, with God, with God up in this and devil underneath and horrific horrific ideas of reality where you burn in hell forever if you
Yeah, I'm a little bit more.
go
Yeah,
for the
no,
right
I'm not a big fan myself. I'm a guy. I'm a man
yeah
of God. Like everyone knows, I'm just not a religious person. I can't get with it. It's not my thing. But I always see like dreaming is more like the seat of the soul, the third eye, the pineal gland, and the releasing of dimethyltryptamine into the body when sleeping to connect some type of state. And I'm sure there's you can go from many angles. If you can go from the mysticism angle, which I prefer, and then you can also go from the quantum, the quantum field, which is also when you get down like really deep into past the quarks and stuff, you basically just come to like, pair relationships between like two whatever they call that, not atoms, but smaller than that, like elements of atoms. There's a word for it. I'm sure I'm missing
yeah
it. Particles. Thank you. and so it's so that they were there at that stage, speaks a lot. There's a lot that we as Westerners are missing when it comes to indigenous concepts and ideas that we are like now slowly catching up to by separating out, giving them their space that they deserve, and actually talking to them and getting into their a lot of things that they learn about. Because here there's still plenty of towns within, I'm here in the heart of Mayan country, and there's places here they don't speak Spanish, you don't speak Mayan, they don't understand you. So there's
it's
people
wonderful.
that go in there and they actually talk to them, and they know a lot about plant medicines and an amazing wealth of knowledge that we're just slowly realizing that we were lacking in. Thank you, Big Pharmaceutical, for that as well.
Yeah, yeah. And so I've lectured to university and high school students and technical colleges, and this is decades ago. I was one of the first, and so I created all the courses, and so I taught zoology, botany, ecology,
Oh,
anthropology,
wow.
Aboriginal culture, Aboriginal religion, Aboriginal bush medicine. I used to make sort of tonics for the students out of the natural plants, and also taught geography and cosmology. And so I can explain like our true reality. The only thing that exists in the universe is communication. There is nothing but communication, and of course that's what we're doing, communicating. And so I know quantum mechanics and physics very well, and so
Okay.
we know that the only thing that exists in the universe, if you ask a physicist to describe reality, they say that the universe is constructed entirely out of movement. And of course, there's two kinds of movement. There's the straight line movement, which is sunlight and heat. Sunlight traveling at 186,000 miles per
Miles
second.
per second.
And
eight light minutes from the sun. Let's go, Mr. Opit.
and it takes I think it's 4 light years, 4 years for the light to reach us from the nearest star.
Alpha Centauri.
Yeah. And then remember that then the other, so that's one form of movement, which is known as radiation, and then reality is created by that straight line movement, the electromagnetic spectrum, which goes, we can only see the tiny bit visible light, and then you've got ultraviolet light and infrared light, and it keeps on going for infinity. And we can see a tiny bit of it. But when that straight line movement or radiation interacts with this spiraling or circular movement or radiation, which is, of course, atomic structures. We have the atoms, and the atoms consist of a little nucleus in the center, and little electrons spinning around it. And that's what we're all composed. That's what the universe is composed of. And of course, originally they thought they were little tiny particles, but when they looked at them, they discovered, no, they're just movement as well. So you've got a little stationary bit of radiation of movement and these electrons spinning around it, which are also just energy in themselves, right? So that means that we're constructed entirely out of energy, and energy is just our term for movement, or it's another term for communication, because everything's obviously communicating. Communicating is one thing interacting with another thing. And so the only thing that exists is the spirit realm. This is the astral realm. uh, Nothing else can possibly exist but the astral realm. There's only the spirit realm, and that's why the indigenous people all around the world, and the Australian Aboriginal First Nation people, they all understood, because they lived in the environment, and they regarded everything as spiritual, and they were spot on, and they believed there was spirits everywhere, spirits in the rocks and spirits in the trees and the animals, and they were all, everything had spirits, and they were 100% correct, because there's a trouble with Western science. We've tried to divide everything up, which is a good idea, because then you can have technology, you can understand how everything works. But all these divisions are false, and so, like, we see ourselves as individuals, there's you and I, but we're communicating. And when you look at what we're constructed out of, we know that we're only looking at the surface of each other and our clothing, but we can't see the real us, because the real us are a millimetre inside of us. And all we can see really is this dead skin and our clothing technology. But if we ever saw the real us, we'd be terrified, because we don't know the real us, because it's all of the blood and the organs and the brain cells and everything else, and the skeleton. Like, I mean, the only people that really know what a human being looks like is some sort of, a surgeons that open us up and look to see what's inside. And
yeah, if you're coming through from the purview of like a Newtonian physics, yes, I would kind of see that. But I mean, isn't there a place for, okay, they're saying, you're saying energy, another synonym for that could be soul, light force. There's something like, we're like behind the eyes looking out, but we're also out here at the same time. And there's something to that as well, like because you can say communicating is the only thing, but there also could be the idea of consciousness, the ability to be aware of your own existence. I think everyone has that, and everything has that. It's just the size of your antenna is kind of connected to somehow the size of your brain, for lack of a better term.
Yes, that's right. So like, so the communication obviously makes consciousness. You can't have consciousness without communication.
Deal.
And because we don't look out, of course, we can only look in, because I mean, see, bats and dolphins and things that echolocate, they can send a pulse out and it reflects off something like that. But really, we only look in because the sunlight is bouncing off objects and hitting us into the eye, and hits us at the back of the retina, and we see everything upside down.
Right.
And you can wear a pair of spectacles that'll turn the images around, and then it'll take a month or something. You take them off and you see everything upside down, and your brain's got to turn it around. Well, like a camera, the lens.
Yeah.
And then so we only see what the back of our eyeball. And then our brain, and we can only see about 15% of reality, like, I mean, actual physical reality in front of us, and our brain creates the rest, so that it creates our vision. So we, in a way, we look out, but at the same time, we're really looking inwards to be able to look out, because the information has to come, and we call it sunlight, but that sunlight has a wave-like property and a particle-like property, which is an impossibility. Right. So we can't say what sunlight really is. Same way we haven't really worked out what gravity is. We haven't worked out the basis of reality, even which we exist.
Yeah, but isn't it wonderful though? Isn't it? I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
We make models of reality. But what we are that reality. Like, and as well as that, we can't think for ourselves. You and I, we think, we can think for ourselves. We've got our own minds, but we don't, because we must remember that we were taught to think, that our parents and our community taught us to read and write and think. So we can only have community consciousness. So the only thing that really exists is no real individuals, where there's only communities. So there's communities of people, obviously, and we're directly connected with our ancestors, because our ancestors created us, and then we're creating the next generation if we reproduce. And our technology is building up through time. And so we're directly connected with time and space. But time and space don't really exist. These are all delusions in our mind, and they're essential delusions so that we can move through our environment and survive. But they're nothing to do with reality, which is why even physics today cannot understand reality. Like you've got Newtonian physics, and then you've got quantum mechanics, and neither of them match up. And if they don't match up, that means you don't have an understanding of reality, that you don't know anything. Because if you wander around in your house and you've got two different understandings of reality, you know, that
you can't survive.
Reality and the spiritual reality, that means you don't have an understanding of anything. You're or you could say illiterate or uneducated, because the spirit and the material world can't be separate, because there's only one entity, which is reality. And so if you're dividing or separating spirit from, material reality, that means you don't have an understanding of reality. You don't have any knowledge at all. You're totally delusional, because there cannot be any separation between communication. All communication is communication. There can't be any separation between it.
So it's some type of, like, there's two magisterias kind of working at the same time that we, for some reason, cannot quantify and say, like, they call it M theory, where they combine the two together. They haven't been able to do that. Actually, I've heard recently, like, the whole string theory situation seems to be a dead end. There hasn't been any, like, anything moving forward in, like, the last 40 years. There hasn't been any breakthrough. We don't know what's going on. But I love it. I love it, Mr. Opit. I love... I just, like when you look in your children's eyes, or your wives, or your significant other, or even other animals, and being in nature, I enjoy nature like you. You've been deeper and darker than I have, which is fantastic. I'm a little afraid, a little scaredy cat, but I am less scared than most city dwellers. And I enjoy it out there immensely. I enjoy it much more than the oceans. The oceans are pretty, they're great, but I don't want to be underwater. I want to be with the land animals.
And the best place to be is in the best place is be in the forest, of course.
Absolutely.
Surrounded, so and the world is wonderful, and it's the delusions, following these delusions that all the hatred and all the warfare and everything else, and the unhappiness and everything, because only nature exists. There's nothing but nature. There is nothing artificial, because everything comes from nature. There's only one living entity in existence, and that's and the known existence, and that's the surface of the planet. Because as we know, we've listened to, tried to see if there's any sounds coming from space or whatever. Our astronomers have examined vast quantities of space, and the universe is basically dead.
Well, isn't it the WOW signal that they got back in the late 70s? The WOW signal?
Yeah, they got that. They got that one where. Now, I'm not saying there aren't extraterrestrials, and I've actually I scientifically named 30 species of extraterrestrial 20 years ago. And it's completely unknown to the rest of the world.
Whoa, Mr. Opit, what do you know about extraterrestrials?
Oh, I know an enormous amount about extraterrestrials.
Okay, can we...
all about extraterrestrials. You want me to?
Do you have time?
Yeah, I have time. I got plenty of time.
Would you be offended if would it be okay? Offend is the wrong word. Would you be okay if I say, okay, this is the end of the show here, and I put you on like an overtime thing, like for so people want to continue on? Okay,
yeah, I'm happy to do that. So
so this is the break, guys. And 1 second, I'll just go and do my little spiel, and then I'll cut it and throw it over on the other thing. I've never done it before, but I'm enjoying the conversation with you, so let's do that. Okay, guys, if you want to go over and catch the rest of the interview, this is my first time. I'm going to put it over on, I think it's called Patreon, and I got to look into it. But I'm enjoying my conversation with Mr. Opit. So remember, we are the eye. We are aware. Love you all. Good night.